I primarily work on forest management planning is where most of my time is spent. And an integral portion of that is spent on drawing up custom maps for new properties, checking out new forests, and really doing support work for all kinds of projects that we're here working on. The usual map suite that we draw up, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick. Yeah. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
All right. So I'm just going to take you really quickly through the suite of maps. We usually put together about 7. I don't have all of them here because some of them are very landowner specific. But first off, we have the aerial map, which is an old favorite, just aerial photography, basic roads and streams taken from the DNR data sets that are all publicly available. The boundary here is just a random public land I drew up as a sample. And yeah, it is a pretty good source for seeing just some of the initial variability in the forest. You can see up in the upper left corner, there's a lot of fuzzy looking forest texture, which is a good indicator that there's a lot of variation in the stands that are out there, a lot of larger trees, a lot of gaps in the canopy. So that's something that we look for here. While along the roadway, down in the center portion of the property, you can see that it's more standard across the canopy. Everything looks more or less the same. And so that's a good indicator that that might be an even age stand, a single plantation, or one cohort where conditions are mostly contiguous. But I would look at other maps that we're going to look at in a second just to verify that kind of stuff. And then, okay, I'll show the hydrology map. So a lot of the maps that we produce have a LiDAR generated base layer. So I use data that is sourced from the DNR LiDAR dataset where they use a laser pulse to get a detailed map of the forest floor and a second detailed map of the canopy, and are able to generate a model of what it actually looks like without vegetation or tree cover, and then with vegetation and tree cover. So a lot of the maps that you're going to see for the next few minutes are going to have that underneath. So this is just the bare forest floor. You can see the old river pathways, which I always think is kind of cool, as well as more of the hydrologic information that you can find on the DNR publicly available, all of this. I have here the blue and purple are streams. The purple is a fish-bearing stream. The blue is just, purple is the shoreline of the state, and blue is a fish-bearing stream. And then the blue crosshatch that you can see is a wetland. And I added the wetland buffers just to give a sense of what mapping is able to do. All this was done remotely. We haven't been out to any of these sites, but without even setting foot in the forest, you can get a good sense of what your buffers are going to look like, where the streams are, what the topography looks like, and even where streams don't show up on the DNR data set, which happens fairly frequently, you can usually tell with the old river pathways and contours on the slope where those streams might be. So it's kind of cool that it gives you a place where you might want to investigate further just to really verify that there aren't any streams there. I'm just going to fly through these all really quick, and then if y'all have any questions about the maps we put together, you let me know. We also generate a site class map. This site class information doesn't take any work to produce. It is all just what is publicly available through the DNR. This is overlaid over the bare soil topography, like I mentioned at the last one. It still has the same information for hydrology. I changed the color of the roads just to make it more visible. But this gives you a sense of over the landscape how productivity varies. So the dark green is a site class 1, which is the best soils in the state. And then that goes down in quality to site class 5, and then red alder are not classified. This is somewhat interesting. You don't usually see too much not classified out there, and it's usually because of wet soils, which you would see right around the wetland there. So that makes a fair amount of sense. The wetland might be larger than you would typically expect from the DNR model. And so that might account for some of that. We also produce slopes. And so this is a contour, which we do produce. It isn't fully available through the DNR, or at least we don't use the DNR layer. there are a number of layers that you can generate from the LiDAR, including stuff like slope and a canopy model, which I'll be showing in a second. And so this gives a better indicator of what the relief actually looks like out there. So you can tell, perhaps not from the original LiDAR, but from the contour that slope on the far south end is really, really steep. And so that's something that would be really good to know if you wanted to potentially harvest timber out there. You'd know that you maybe need to look at cable logging or really just staying away from the slope entirely. And it's good to know as far as access routes go as well. It's tough to, get logging equipment up steep slopes. And so in some areas where you've got a slope break and then a road on the other side, even if the ground is perfectly fine on top of the hill, if you can't figure out access to get around the steep slopes, you might have to drop that unit and stuff like that. So that's really good to know. And it's something that you can tell before you get out there, so you can be sure to go tour that part of the site and assess what's going on and whether or not that's actually going to be commercially viable, or whether harvests up there and thinning up there is going to come at a cost, which you would later have to account for while writing a plan. And then the last one I think I'll show you is the canopy map. So this, as I said before, when it comes to LiDAR, they take the first pulse that comes back to the plane when they fire the laser down, and that is a good map of the top of the canopy and the top of all vegetation. But then the second pulse is the topography under the forest, or under the forest cover, so it's just the bare earth. And if you subtract those two layers in a service like ArcGIS, you can actually get a relatively accurate model of what the canopy looks like. So here you can see where we noticed in the aerial photography where there was all that variation, you do see some really, really short areas that are gaps where the average vegetation height is under 20 feet, but also trees that are in between 160 to 200 feet. So that is typical of what we would see if we were looking at old growth forest, which again, I haven't been out here. I can't verify that that is old growth forest, but that is something that I would want to look at and potentially mark out as a really useful ecological habitat, or a really valuable piece of forest land that I would want to work to preserve its characteristics and stuff like that. And then down around the road is exactly what you would expect, where everything's mostly just an even height, and there really isn't that much variation. What I particularly like about this map and the canopy maps in general is that you can see where there's little patches where things are shorter that could be potential problems that you want to flag out and make sure that you go see. Oftentimes when I'm touring residential properties and small non-industrial lands, I'll find that little gaps like that, little pockets like that, are often good indicators of either really wet soil, so you might have a wetland that isn't really mapped out, or you could have a pocket of root rot. So if I go and tour one of these small pockets where things are a lot shorter, and I see that there's a lot of snags and a lot of downwood with really rotted root bases, I'll know that perhaps root rot is what I'm looking at, and so I'll be able to manage the surrounding forest with that in mind. That's something that I probably wouldn't see in a really, really large forest, where I might not have time to actually tour every inch of it without having some previous experience or some idea of what I'm actually looking for out here. And something that I think is really, really cool is that if you zoom in, you can actually see individual treetops. So if you had the time and inclination, you could even get an idea of what the density looks like in the most dominant cohort out in the forest. So I've always thought that that's pretty neat. I think that that is a pretty good stopping point if anyone has any cursory questions so far, or needs me to elaborate further on any of our mapping services. All right, I think I can move on. So once I have, oh, hang on. There we go. I'm going to switch over to AirPlay really quick. Cool. So once we've prepared the maps in ArcGIS, you can actually export them as georeferenced PDFs that let you navigate the field with them and basically use them as like a surface like you would Google Maps. Hang on, something funky happened on my end. All right. Can anybody see my screen?
We can see kind of the outline of the AirPlay
Okay,
box where your phone screen should be, but it's
yeah,
just
let
black
me
inside.
try
There
that
we go.
again. Oh, classic. It's one of those cases where, of course, it was working earlier. Here, let me just start it over again. Mhm. All right. Okay, cool. There we go. So this is the same folder that we were just looking at, but on my phone screen. And I'm going to go ahead and switch over to Avenza really quick just to give an overview. So Avenza, uh, as I said, basically works as Google Maps, but has like a custom surface element so that you can look at individual maps that have features that you're more interested in seeing than just the terrain. It does have a terrain beta that's open these days that can just show the general topography of the land. It has roads, it has cities on it. If you scroll up a certain depth, you can see some of the contours and get a better sense of the texture of the earth. That's something I haven't really messed around with too much, but it's kind of fun to explore. Uh, they also have a store where you have maps that are both paid and freely available, including stuff that's very local, a lot of public parks and stuff like that, a lot of trail maps, which is pretty cool. It's got Forest Service areas, which you could probably use to find a Christmas tree when it comes to be that time. So that's interesting. But what I primarily use this for is to add my own custom-made maps from ArcGIS and then use it to tour around that way. I've loaded a few of them on here, but just to show you how easy it is to add maps on, I can go ahead. I already downloaded one onto my phone. It's just in files as if it was texted to me or something like that. And it is in the download folder, Arial, open, and just like that, it loads on in. And it's pretty quick to get. But what I think is perhaps even easier, if you have Google Drive saved onto your phone, if you just open it in Drive and just select open in, it'll download it right onto your phone. You can scroll over to Avenza or open more apps if you need to. And just like that, downloads in. And then once you open any of these maps, you're able to, it won't show me on here because I'm not in this forest, but if you were driving through, if you were walking through, if you were parked on the side, you would show up as a little blue dot, just like you do on whatever map app is already open on your phone. And you're able to navigate around, you're able to find your location, which is really helpful if you're trying to figure out, first of all, how to get back to the car, if you've been out in the brush for about 3 hours, turned all which way about. But also to do stuff like if you wonder if you've hit the wetland yet, or if you found a new wetland, wondering if it's showed up on the map or whether it's something that you're going to have to flag in. And if you were wanting to flag stuff in, one of the best uses for Avenza is its ability to actually generate field notes and act as a record of your time outside. I know personally, I think 2 weeks ago, I lost my field notebook when I was out in the woods, and I ended up putting a full site visit's worth of notes in on Avenza, and it worked just as well, or if not even better, than if I had actually found my notebook and was able to just use my typical paper, write in the right notes the entire time. And so say if you did find a wetland right where the cursor is, you'd be able to use the bottom, not the furthest left icon, but the second furthest left to drop a point, and you're able to put in a place mark, take photos, change whatever style you want to represent your point in. For instance, I often use alert when I step on a bee's nest or when we find a bee's nest, so that I know not to go back and step on that again. You can set a description and actually take a full set of notes. I was using Dictate so that I could just basically blurt out a paragraph and then later look back on that if I wanted to add stuff back in when I was in front of my desk and trying to figure out how to write a comprehensive description of the stand. And then it also keeps track of your location as a georeference point, your elevation, and just standard metadata like the time at which you took the point. So I've always thought that that's super helpful, especially because a lot of areas have waters that aren't typed or aren't mapped, and so being able to pick out a wet spot is always very, very helpful. Another fun feature that you can use is there's in the bottom right corner a draw and measure tool that allows you to basically just draw lines by adding single points. And then it tells you in feet or whatever other unit you want to use how long of a distance you are, where the elevation of the endpoint is, and the bearing. We frequently use this when we're navigating from plot to plot, because if it gives you 200 feet and a bearing of 308, you know exactly which way to turn your compass and where to get to. And it can do both individual points as well as sections. So if you're trying to like trace a roadway or something like that, it'll tell you exactly how long your forest road is, or at least a good enough estimate to be able to ballpark it, which is excellent if you're trying to figure out how much rock you need or things like that, how far down the road the blowout is. Really, it's the ideal way to gain reference points when you're out in the woods and don't have time to fully measure with a tape or with pacing how far apart stuff is. And another pretty cool feature that I particularly use, since I'm often the first one to visit and assess a forest, is if you use the draw and measure tool, and let's see, so I'll add a point here and here and just really trace this upland area here beyond the river, roughly, because obviously accuracy at this moment isn't particularly important. And then I click that center box down at the bottom of the screen. It collects the area information. And so from that, I'm able to actually get a decent acreage of what it is that I'm looking at. And so I can break up a forest into individual stands and later write full descriptions just like you would with a place note, take photos, change the style so that I'm able to pick apart stuff just visually without having to click on it every time to figure out its name. But then something that I haven't quite done, if I scroll to a different map, you'll see that none of the stuff that we collected shows up, which can be a problem if, say, I had traced that area in the top right corner, or sorry, the top left corner of my unit, and I wanted to see what it actually looked like in the canopy profile, or if I wanted to see what the forest looked like visually through the aerial photos to see if maybe I could pick out some hardwood pockets. Actually, especially this is useful when trying to pick out pockets of root rot, being able to see if the canopy looks like it has a hole in it, or how big the hole is, if it's too brushy to really wade into or trace the entire outline of. And so to fix that, you can actually go out to the outer folder and save it as a collection. And then suddenly all of the points that we drew are on every single map. And so you can compare back and forth what the forest looks like, examining a variety of characteristics from hydrology to canopy to the aerial photography. One of the
Sam,
last things
sorry to interrupt,
yes,
but can you show that one more time? The
absolutely.
folder you went to?
Switching to a collection. So I just go back out. This is my home screen. So this has all of the folders and all of the maps that I would use. And then if you click the three dots up top, you can say like create collection. You can click the three dots over here on the right side of each individual folder and convert to collection or rename the folders. It's really the full edit button. Whatever you need to do to a folder, the three dots are the way to go. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And just so that people know, are you using or what sort of smartphone are you using? Because I think it'll look slightly different depending on whether you have Android or iPhone, right?
Sure. Yes, I've used this is an iPhone. I have used Android and it is subtly different. But in some ways, I think it's actually a little bit easier to use. It's a little bit more intuitive. But sadly, I don't think I can represent that right now since I don't have that sitting in front of me. All right. Any other questions at this point?
Yeah, Chris was just referring to the maps you were showing earlier. She
Sure.
was asking what the website is for the maps, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I can go. Okay, so I guess I should clarify for these maps or for data sources in general.
Well, I think maybe both. You could answer both of those.
Okay, these maps are just stored in my personal drive, which I could add a link and share publicly if you all wanted. This isn't connected to like anything else, so I could share this pretty freely and openly. And then if you wanted, I could also put together just a quick list of common data sources The DNR has a GIS data set where if you just look up DNR GIS, it'll send you to a page where you can type in all manner of things from parcels to hydrology, and basically they will share whatever is publicly available for free, and you can just download it right there. And then if you look up DNR LiDAR database, it's the same thing. And we can actually go into a demonstration of that a little bit later if people would like, because I think that that is one of the more useful things that you can do if you have access to ARC and can actually work with the information. It is a really powerful source.
But the kind of formatted maps we were just looking at in Avenza and that you were showing us just the larger PDFs of earlier, you made those in ArcGIS, and those are kind of a sample of what you would create in a forest management plan, or that someone might find. Yeah, so you've done some formatting. They don't, like DNR doesn't just have those like that. They have the data, and then you would create those.
Exactly. Yeah, I guess I'd say like the pieces of the puzzle are all pretty free and easy to get, but then once you actually need to combine those into something like a custom map, you can use either ArcGIS, which is I think $100 a year for a license, or there's a free and open source QGIS, which is very similar but has some differences that trick people up. But that is totally free, and I'm sure there are resources available online for that. Okay. Sorry, it kicked me out really quick. Okay, any other questions about the maps that I have? Would we like to see a link in the chat for that?
Yeah, if you have a link, that would be great.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's see. All right, that should do it. That link should give you access. Yeah.
So if you wanted to practice like some of what we were just looking at, you could use that link on your computer to download one of these PDF maps, and then like email it to yourself and open up that email on your phone, and then download the map to your phone. And then if you have Avenza downloaded, you can then open that map in Avenza and kind of practice drawing shapes. A couple of steps in there, but
Yeah. But there aren't too many buttons, and so if you really just click around, it's pretty easy to get there. The big ones are on the bottom there. That arrow just takes the central cursor to wherever it is you are in the map, which is helpful if you're working with a large map and you're scrolled in really far. It is nice to be able to just come back to you. Or if you're drawing distances, it's nice to put a point where you want to go and then press the bottom left button, and it'll take the map right back to you. And then, of course, the one next to the triangle there is the point map, where it just drops a point wherever it is your cursor lands. And then the two on the right, the furthest right is the draw and measure tool with a variety of other things under it. It's really got anything that you want to work with in Avenza. I primarily just use draw and measure. I haven't found too much use for the rest of this. Plot GPS average can be helpful for things like accuracy if you're trying to put in a ton of points and you need to get some math in as to your sampling. But I primarily just use it for navigation and to take notes when I'm out in the field. And then this other button, the only one that I haven't covered yet, is the 4 squares or 3 squares that are stacked on top of each other. And you can use that once you're done touring the field, once you're done with the site visit, once you have all the things that you want to draw on the map, or even just draw on the map for now. And you can actually export that back to yourself by sharing it either to yourself through or others through AirDrop, or you can export to others through things like Google Drive or your email. and it'll send it as a KML format, which can then be imported into ArcGIS. And you can use that to create more detailed custom maps for things that I would do after the site visit, like creating a map for the NRCS conservation activity plans, or for putting together a forest management unit map that breaks up the forest and describes individual ways and individual strategies to achieve landowner goals. And I think the only feature that I didn't cover that I use on a regular basis is if you swipe up on that bottom bar, it brings up a compass, which can be helpful for navigating if you don't have one on you. It isn't quite as accurate as having a physical compass, so I would definitely still recommend that, but it works better than nothing in a pinch. But you can also track yourself. So if I pressed start tracking, it would follow me as I work through the forest, creating a trail similarly to the draw and measure tool. It's just an orange line like you would see otherwise, but it does a decent job of following your trail so that you can do things like walk unmapped roads or walk hiking trails that aren't on your map, and then use that to add those to GIS after the site visit. It's also really helpful if you're working in really difficult terrain and you need to find your way back to where you left your car, or to where you have an easy way down a slope or something like that. And then navigation allows you to drop a point, and then it will basically chart a straight path towards that point so that you don't have to keep checking your bearing against a line that you trace yourself. It basically takes care of that for you and draws a tether from where you want to be to where you are, so that you can navigate there as easily as possible. Right. Does anyone have any other questions about Avenza? Should we go back over how to get maps in if people are there yet?
I think that'd be a good idea. Scott did ask whether Avenza or Avenza works online at all. Like, does it have a separate online mapping
Avenza
tool?
doesn't particularly work online. This service and some other services like it are designed for field notes, basically. So they're designed for mobile devices where you can be out, and usually it works without data service or connectivity, which is really helpful because most of these field sites, you're not going to have very good service. So as far as I know, it is strictly a downloaded app for mobile devices. And the one that I have is a paid version, and so it allows me to have as many maps as I need. It's really just up to my phone's capacity. But the free version has all of the major features that I've covered in this. The one limitation is it only allows you to have about 3 maps at a time on your phone, which honestly is just about as much as you would need for any single field site. Usually I'll only have like the aerial / hydrology map. I usually do like a combination of those two for site visits, the canopy map, and then just a topographic slope map to help with navigation around in the field.
Do you have any other questions about what we've covered so far? Anything we want to look at again? I know it's kind of hard sometimes to see where Sam's clicking because he can't see his finger, but
yeah, I try to remember to describe what I'm clicking as much as possible, but all the time spent on this app, sometimes it's hard to remember what steps actually go into getting something done.
no. Well, maybe we can move on to the next topic you wanted to cover, Sam.
Sure. I don't quite know how we're doing on time, but if we wanted, we could get into here. Let me share the other, just some of the best data sources that I found for GIS. If people want to look into that, and even if you don't have GIS, you might be able to benefit from just viewing the LiDAR imagery that they have for your area, just in case you wanted to look at drainages and maybe piece together what the forest floor looked like before you tore your land or something like that. Because it can show things like road blowouts, like old landslides, so you'd know if there's unstable slopes and stuff like that. And it's just really a cool tool to be able to get to know your land better. I really like it.
Sam, actually, I have a question just occurred to me with Avenza. Can you do the same sorts of shapes and lines and kind of those tools just on the base map, or do you have to have a map, like a PDF map uploaded in Avenza, or could you just use
That's
a
a
base
very
map?
good question. I am pretty sure that you need a regular map, but we have it in front of us and it seems like folks are mostly just catching up. So we can go ahead and give it a try.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. So we're back in. So I'm just going to use the base map here, and it looks like all of our features are still there. So yeah, you can absolutely do all of that just on the base map that they have here. So
Okay.
you'll lack
Yeah.
the functionality of things like the canopy map, but they do have some green spaces, which usually correlate with things like wet areas and steep slopes and stuff like that. And the further down into it you get, the more you can see things like contours and stuff like that. So that'd be good for all of your slope needs, as well as access, which is often a trickier thing to get.
Okay, that's cool. So even if you don't have, the PDF map that shows hydrology or whatever feature, natural resource feature we were talking about just now, you could still open this free base map, and like chart your route through your forest. And it'll probably just show green and maybe some roads if you're near a major road and maybe a river, but not much else in terms of detail. But you could see like the path you followed previously.
And if your forest stands or whatever you're trying to make note of does have any stark topographic features, if you're on a ridge or if you're on a particular side of a drainage, you might be able to map that out just with the information that you have here. And if anyone's interested in the NNRG producing a suite of maps like this for them, feel free to shoot us an email. That is something that we've considered doing, and if there is enough interest, we would be happy to. And I think I see some some names of folks that I've worked with before on maps like these. So I might actually have maps like these that are already pre-georeferenced for your property, and I would be happy to send those off your way.
And maybe you can clarify what like the georeferenced PDF means for people, because I don't know if that wasn't a super familiar concept to me. I just think of PDFs as PDFs, but to be georeferenced is, you can't just have a regular PDF of a map, right?
Absolutely. So these georeferenced PDFs, they show up both as like printable versions and things that you can just see online as just documents, but electronically and in this format, they have every point on this map coordinates with a latitude and longitude. And so you're able to actually map each individual point to an actual point in space. And so your phone's GPS can compare where you are to where the point is on this map, and basically allow you to walk across its face.
Got it. Thanks, Sam. Did you want to look at some of the data sources maybe that you typically use for these? And if anyone has questions, feel free to jump in. I think we're well within the kind of discussion portion of the chat now. So,
and yeah. I would be happy to go back to any point in this. I know it seems like it was all going very, very fast. So there's absolutely no harm in revisiting any or all of this. Right. But unless anybody has anything they'd like to see in particular, I'm just going to navigate over to the data sources. So I've got a number of map data sources I really like as for aerial imagery. apps.nationalmap.gov. And so I'm going to go ahead and just copy this into the chat. And so from here, you can get a variety of different mapping resources, including LiDAR. But for this site, I primarily rely on Imagery Nape, which provides really high quality aerial images of almost anywhere. All it requires you to do is zoom in to wherever it is that you're looking, and then use the extent button up here to just quickly trace whatever it is that you want to look at, and then search products. And it will look through its full set of aerial images, and then you can find individual ones that match up with where you're looking. So you'll see as I go over these, the little boxes pop up that show exactly where those aerial photos would be. And then once you find one that you like, you just download the link and it downloads itself as a JPEG. Quick and easy. You can use it just as an image if you want to, or you can just drop it into ArcGIS. And it is, I believe, georeferenced, so it just auto-locates itself to wherever it's supposed to be. So you don't need to figure out where it belongs on the map. It just fits in with all of the rest of your information. Any question about this site?
Could that work in Avenza, a georeferenced JPEG, or no?
I haven't tried to just add a single georeferenced JPEG, but I'm pretty sure I've only worked with PDFs, so that's something I'd have to experiment with a little bit more.
And does this have historical aerial imagery? Like if someone is curious about what their forest looked like before their ownership started?
That is a good question. I believe that these are all sorted. I think I have the newest to oldest, but you can see the dates that they have. And I believe that they just auto update this. So this particular site, I don't believe would have that, but I'm sure you can find, if not the oldest images, fairly old images. A good resource for historical images though, not particularly for mapping through Avenza or anything like that, but Google Earth is really good for historical photos, and they often have as far back as the mid-80s. And it's all, of course, site depending, but if you have Google Earth or access to Google Earth, then you can find your property. You can use a clock button on the top taskbar, and it will show you basically what they have. That's something I could get into if people are interested in, or we can continue to review data sources for ArcGIS.
Any hands raised for that? Nope. Okay, let's just continue with the data sources, and then if we have extra time, we can talk about that.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So the Washington DNR LiDAR portal is pretty cool. It automatically populates with everything that they have. And so you can see, I'm just going to hide all of these, but a lot of them have pretty big extents. They've got just full watersheds. A lot of them are focused on counties. A lot of them are patchy. They date back from like 2002, early 2000s for some of the earliest, and some of them have up to like 2021, some of the most recent. And so this is something I really want to underline is the more recent your data is, the more likely it is to actually reflect conditions at your site. I know sometimes, especially when it comes to canopy maps, the most recent I can find is like 2009. And so that gives you a good indication of where stuff might be, but you have to understand that a lot might have changed in between when you're looking at something and when the data currently is, or when the data was first taken. And so if we scroll down just to a forested area, you can, very similarly to the other site we were looking at, use this button over here to find the extent of whatever it is that you're looking. And then it auto-populates with all of the surveys that intersect with that area. They might not fully cover it, and so it's usually a good idea to go through the full menu over on the side there and find one of the ones that is shown in this area, and then you can auto-populate. You see how towards the bottom there isn't any data covering that, and so that would be a missing area if you were to download this. And you can download, first of all, the raw data for the surface, which is the DSM, is the bare surface of the trees, and then the digital terrain model, or DTM, is the bare surface of the earth. So DSM is canopy, DTM is just the bare earth. And you can also just get the hillshades, which is what's shown here is just the terrain hillshade. And so as you zoom in, especially on these fairly recent ones like 2017, you can make out individual roadways and drainages. If a road is blown out because of a bad culvert or something, you can often see that as well. And it gives you a pretty good idea of what the terrain looks like. Sometimes because of the shading that goes into these, you miss how steep the slope really is. But even if you didn't know exactly where the boundaries were on your property, this is a really good way to figure out where there might be streams, because if a stream's mapped all the way up through here, it might not show all of these peripheral streams coming off the side. And so if you're trying to figure out where the water is on your property, especially if you're trying to plan for a timber harvest, this could be a really good resource just to point you in the right direction.
And to download this then, like just the data in that extent that you selected, the DTM hillshade, or is it just the download button?
So you can download the full data set. Those are really, really big files, so I would definitely discourage that. But this download button will download just the extent of this rectangle here, and for all of the boxes that are checked up here. So usually I will set up an extent that includes the area that I'm looking at, as well as a lot of the surrounding area, just so that I'm sure that I get enough that I can show it, or the full extent in the map that I produce. And then I will just deselect all of the oldest data, because that's usually not as helpful as the new stuff. And then this will download only 1 or 2 of the small tiles that go into making this up. And that will, first of all, make it a lot faster to download, and then it'll also make it a lot easier to work with once you get it into ArcGIS. Because for all of the processes that you might want to do, whether generating contours or creating a canopy model, will go a lot faster if you're just working with only the data that you need.
And what file format does that download as if you were to just select one of these maps?
Sure. It creates a zip drive that usually is full of TIFF data. So it comes out as a, for GIS, it would be like a raster, but it usually, like you can open it in just an image viewer often, but it's usually a lot chunkier. It doesn't really handle easily.
I think Avenza accepts TIFFs, right? So in theory, someone could like directly pull a little extent, download it, you know, email it to themselves if it's a small enough file. It'll take a while, but then they could open up in Avenza, right? And kind of explore.
Yeah, if you could get a TIFF into Avenza, which I don't have experience in, but most of what I work through spatially is funneled through ArcGIS. But yeah, if you can find a data format that Avenza will take, you can definitely use it just as if it were a map. And something else I should point out, if you're using odd, somewhat chunky data like this, because as you can see, it's a really funky shape, and there are a lot of these files that fit together to cover the landscape and give as full coverage as we have. The collections setting that I used before, where I converted a folder of a bunch of different files into a single collection and was able to transfer data back and forth, was originally designed for spatial data that didn't exactly line up. So that would allow you, as you're walking through this landscape, to cross from one tile to another, and it would automatically know to transfer you over to that other tile. So that's something that you might want to look at if you're working with data like this.
Do you want to throw that link into the chat as well?
Absolutely. Thank you for the reminder. All right, and the last one that really has So this is a little bit more difficult to navigate. I believe there was a fairly recent update that made this a little bit trickier, but the Department of Natural Resources provides a lot of data that is absolutely free to use and is very, very helpful to have. They've got watersheds, just quickly clicking through a variety of different data sets related to forest health and stuff like that. We primarily I will use the search bar to download the most recent hydrology data, where you can get like rain on snow, subsurface hydrologic stuff, ecoregions. Let's look for streams. So water bodies will have everything like lakes to, I think, wetlands and some of the larger streams as well. Water courses is where we'll usually go for stream data. And I believe you might be able to download extents as well, but you can download feature layers just through the download button. And these are fairly small, so you can just download the full data set and not have to worry too much about it. You will often be able to preview stuff when there are smaller data sets, but for streams, as I think you can see, there's too many records. And so it would start breaking things if you tried to open it all and view it before downloading. But a lot of this information that comes with it is stuff like stream names. The labels are not particularly educational, but it comes with stuff like stream names where the streams are named, as well as whether or not they have types, so fish bearing, shorelines of the state, things that affect how much of a buffer length you need to put around them, all come in this folder. So obviously there is some ground verification. Strums type streams on properties don't actually exist. They were generated by models and weren't verified. Other ones have streams that are or should be typed and aren't listed in the DNR datasets. But this is a really good starting point if you're trying to map the hydrology. And it looks like they perhaps offer some sort of easy to map service as well, where you can actually get the data out of there, maybe without using ArcGIS. All of these sources are good places to play around with, see what is available to you and see what might be able to answer some of the questions you have. Oh, and first of all, I'll put the link in the comments or in the chat. But then a last good resource that I feel the need to mention is the NRCS Geospatial Gateway, or Data Gateway, has a lot of information on a national level. This is where I would go for things like land cover, which is really interesting if you're trying to assess forested area on a much broader scale. I'll just... And so they've got all kinds of stuff from like climate precipitation to more person-oriented things like census data, but also things that you probably aren't going to find so well with the DNR, including soils information, which is really, really useful to have, but also land use land cover. This national land cover data set, if populated into GIS, shows everything from different rough forest typings, conifer, hardwood, mixed forest, to things like forested wetlands, glacial areas, water, field, agriculture, and different types of urban environments. So if you're doing anything landscape scale or trying to figure out how much of your area is forested, perhaps, this is a really good place for you. And I'm going to go ahead and just add this to the chat as well.
And Chad asked about, can you download a DNR LiDAR file and use it on Google Earth Pro?
I don't know too much about Google Earth Pro. It would definitely be worth a try.
I did a quick Google search, and I think maybe you can, as long as it's a TIFF file that you're downloading from the LiDAR database. So that's handy. I don't know what it would look like overlaid, like maybe you need to add transparency or something to see other features. If like, otherwise I would imagine just be looking at the hill shade again. But yeah, there's a lot of cool features there. And I should mention there's, a lot of layers of complication you can add if you want to get more into mapping. You can take, there's a number of free online courses and a number of paid courses that last, from weeks to months. I think I once took an ArcGIS class for free that was just a couple of weeks long. And we could put together a list of those sorts of opportunities as well. If people are interested in them, I can send them out in a follow-up email, but yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Is there anything we can go back over for anybody?
Any other questions about Avenza? Have any of you used Avenza and found it useful or found it frustrating? In fact, I think I know some of you have used it recently. Richard, are you about to jump in?
I did use it for a while. I did find it much more complicated and has too many more features than I really needed. I found an Onyx Hunt to be a real good phone app that works more reliably in the field, allows me to track where I'm either driving or walking, and then I can transfer those images into other databases as well, but a whole lot less complicated, but fits what I needed it for. And then I do use Google Earth, and I use some of the other resources you mentioned when I want to dig more in depth into a property. But on a day-to-day basis, just being out in the field, I'll go for simple.
Yeah, I know a lot of our harvest foresters prefer Onyx Hunt because it's a really good way to separate out different parcel boundaries. So you're knowing whether or not you're staying on your own land or maybe straying too far afield.
Anyone else have any favorite mapping tools they use? Is anyone a Google Earth aficionado?
I would just, if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I would just mention, I think it's called Land ID now, but it was formerly MapRight, and it gives you the ability to actually overlay the parcel data into Google Earth Pro, And that's really, I mean, Google Earth's fantastic, but that, you know, where it doesn't have a built-in parcel data. But if you're a MapRight subscriber or a Land ID subscriber, it is really handy.
Cool. Thanks, David. Land ID.
Yeah.
Put it in the chat.
I guess I'd mention too, and Sam, you may have already mentioned it, the county resources, both down here, both Lewis County and Thurston County have excellent geospatial websites. And what we used to buy in aerial photographs, they provide for free, and it's not entirely reliable where they put the property lines, but it gives you a pretty good idea.
Yeah, that is an excellent resource. I totally forgot about that one, but I know King County as well and Pierce County. I've looked through their geospatial information, especially for parcel information. Obviously, there's always going to be some mistakes with the publicly available data. Nothing beats having a surveyor out there if you actually want to get the hard lines on the ground. But if you're looking just for a quick glance at the most recent parcel data, you really can't go anywhere else but the county. It's going to be the best one-stop shop. And yeah, just the sheer amount of public geospatial data out there has become really impressive. There's a lot of different spots, a lot of overlapping coverage and things like aerial imagery. LiDAR I saw offered at least 2 of the data repositories that we looked at. So there are really a ton of resources out there for small landowners. If you learn your way around QGIS or ArcGIS, there's a lot that you can do.
Well, we are at 8:30. So we thank you everyone who came tonight, and thanks to Sam for showing us around. Avenza is definitely a useful tool. I think if you, especially if you have the maps, kind of the PDF georeferenced maps with the different natural resource concerns on them, using those seems like a fantastic way to get to know your forest better. But there's a lot of other mapping tools out there, and it obviously can get complicated quickly. We will try to put together a list of the resources that were mentioned today, and then I'll also, because I think there might be some interest in this, try to find kind of a simple list of courses for folks who are interested in like learning more about QGIS and ArcGIS, and you know, there's probably courses on advanced Google Earth usage as well. And if you have any interest in having NNRG create that, like a suite of maps like that for your land, if you're a forest owner or a forest manager, we can do that. And yeah, thank you everyone who came tonight. Thank you so much, Sam, for presenting, and have a good night.